This is such an appropriate episode to kick off January 2023.
Oh, sure.
If you're a dry January person,
yeah,
we support you. If you're not a dry January person, we support you.
Totally.
Because it's so nuanced.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Please Bless This Podcast, the podcast where two sisters talk about all things Mormon and pop culture, and sometimes booze.
Booze. I'm Elisa.
I'm Katie.
Oh, where to even begin? So today we're talking about Below Deck, the Bravo show Below Deck. But it's a springboard to talk about Mormons and booze because there's just a lot to say there.
Yeah, we have some things to say about Mormons and booze. Below Deck is the pop culture tie-in.
Mm-hmm.
And here we go. I do want to mention, we just realized Mercury is in retrograde.
Yeah.
So
and it's affecting us.
It's really... Yeah,
it's affecting us, our equipment, our extended families. So just bear with us. Okay, Below Deck. Let's talk about this. So
you tell me about this show.
I'm going to tell you about this show. So for this episode, we watched a couple of episodes of two different series within the Below Deck universe. So the original Below Deck, the premise of the show is that we follow the crew of a super yacht. And so the stewardesses, the deck crew, the captain are our main characters. And then they have guests coming on throughout the season who are wealthy and often poorly behaved. Mm-hmm. And we see them interact, but mostly we're following the crew and their stories.
Right.
So that's the premise of Below Deck.
It's like Downton Abbey, but for like trashy Americans.
Sure. If you wanna be negative about it. Yeah. I think Below Deck is like the perfect gateway reality TV show. If you're someone who's like, I don't watch reality TV, or I only watch like competition shows or cooking shows or whatever, this is a great gateway into unscripted, non-competition reality TV because there's something for everybody. Like this is the one Bravo show that like my husband has like low-key watched with me. You know, he wouldn't want me to maybe put that out there. I mean, he definitely knows who Captain Lee is. So let's be real.
Okay.
So the original Below Deck started in 2013. The 10th season is airing right now. And we watched an episode of that for this episode. Captain Lee is the captain of this series. Each series has their own kind of captain who returns each season. And it's mostly based in the Caribbean. Below Deck Med started in 2016 with Captain Sandy, who I do not like. She's a sociopath. And it's based in the Med, and there are 7 seasons. Below Deck Sailing Yacht started in 2020. 3 seasons so far. It's Captain Glenn. They're also in the Med, usually around Majorca.
I love that you're calling it the Med and just like,
hello, Below Deck lingo. That's what it is.
Okay, sure.
And obviously, based on the title, you can guess that that's a sailing yacht, which is a whole other animal. And Below Deck Sailing Yacht is phenomenal. If you're gonna start one of these franchises from scratch, I would start Below Deck Sailing Yacht.
Okay.
Below Deck, the original, is great, but the first, because it's so many seasons, the first season or 2 feels a little dated. So that's 2013 just my expert opinion.
was a different time.
A different time. After that, we get Below Deck Down Under 2022. There's only 1 season so far. Premiered on Peacock, but got picked up on Bravo. We got Captain Jason, and they're in Australia. And the newest is Below Deck Adventure. Also started this year, last year. Whoa, 2022. The first season is currently airing, and we watched an episode of it for this podcast. They have Captain Carey, and it's in Norway, the fjords.
Yeah, in the fjords. I kind of like the vibe.
Me too. I'm realizing I have watched every episode of every series within this franchise.
What on earth? I had no idea. That's crazy, Elisa.
I don't know if I realized that until this moment, but I have seen everything. I know
crazy.
everything.
Yeah. Of the two of us, I'm definitely not the reality TV expert, nor am I the consumer. Like, generally, I don't watch reality TV, but I got a kick out of this show. Below Deck took me a minute to like decide to pay attention. Like, my brain just kind of like blocked it out at first.
Yeah.
And I had to be like, no, pay attention. This is for the podcast. Like, you have to watch this stupid fucking show. But then once I started watching it, I was like, oh yeah, this is fun.
Yeah.
I can get into this.
And if you'd been you wouldn't have felt that way about Below Deck season 10 if you were as emotionally invested in Captain Lee's journey as I am. Because in season 10, he's ill and he eventually, spoiler alert, has to leave the season.
Oh no.
He loses feeling in half of his body. And after 10 seasons, I just like love Captain Lee so much. And I'm really rooting for him. So
yeah,
a great franchise, great shows, highly recommend. So the 2 seasons that are currently airing are Below Deck season 10 and Below Deck Adventure season 1. And both of those seasons have episodes that prominently feature Mormon guests on the yacht.
Yeah.
And so we were like, here we go. It's time for the podcast to talk about Below Deck.
You're like, it's time to fold in my most favorite show ever that I've watched 1,000 episodes of.
Yep, exactly. And the obvious thing to talk about when we're talking about Below Deck and Mormons is the way that these Mormon guests are behaving. Well, they're ex-Mormon guests.
Yeah, they're ex-Mormon.
And the way that they are drinking and talking about drinking, and the way that the relationship to alcohol that Mormons have and that ex-Mormons have, and our experiences with that, there's just so much to get into.
Yeah. So the first episode I watched was Below Deck season 10, episode 1, when all the guests were ex-Mormon. And it was like one of the guys' birthday. And they were like presumably in their like mid-30s.
Yeah.
Would you
I would
peg
agree.
them? They were behaving like they were 18-year-olds with fake IDs.
Right.
Like bonkers. Drunk
Running
when
wild.
they got there, falling over, breaking stuff.
Yes.
Like,
can't eat their food, can't function.
No, they're done.
And it's like not even the end of the day yet.
Right. It's like 9:00 at night and they are fully looped.
Yes.
Having a really good time.
Agreed. That's the vibe with them. And likable people, like nice group, but messy.
Yeah, for sure. Sloppy bunch.
And we don't know right away that they have that ex-Mormon connection. It comes up later in the episode when they're talking to the chief, Stu Fraser, and they're like, and Fraser's gay. And they're like, Fraser, have you ever been to Utah or Salt Lake? Like, it's actually super gay friendly. You would probably love it. And I was like, what? Utah, Salt Lake? And that's when you kind of find out, like, yeah, we're all ex-Mormons and we're so fun. And I was like, oh, that maybe explains. And if you watch these shows like I have, you know, a lot of guests get messy. It's not just the ex-Mormons. Yeah. But the ex-Mormons doing it is a good springboard to talk about what happens when you go from like alcohol is something you cannot touch, your soul depends on it, to like go at it.
Yeah, I guess go for it.
Quick recap of Below Deck Adventure, season 1, episode 6. The charter guests are all ex-Mormons, led by Heather Gay from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake, and Angie Harrington, who's also a friend of on this season of Real Housewives of Salt Lake, and they're friends. And then there's also a ex-Mormon stewardess on the season of Below Deck Adventure. So a few things about this episode. Yeah. I think, so obviously Heather Gay, we've talked about her on the podcast. Yes. We've talked about Real Housewives of Salt Lake. We are fans of Heather Gay.
Yeah, absolutely.
She has a book coming out in February called Bad Mormon, a memoir. And clearly, like, Mormonism is a pretty central part of her brand and being a bad Mormon. But it comes up so much on this episode of Below Deck Adventure that it's like embarrassing, weird, awkward.
Yeah. And like seems a little bit scripted, which is weird for this show.
Yeah.
And if not scripted, just like that's like her script that she generally goes off of. Like, you know, I'm Mormon royalty, and these are, you know, just little quips about Mormonism.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, we know. Like,
right. Like one scene in every episode of Below Deck is that the captain gathers together the heads of department and says, like, these are our guests who are coming. Here's a quick bio of the primary charter guest. And the primary charter guest is Heather. And her bio says she was Mormon royalty or married to Mormon royalty. Right. That's your bio when you go on a luxury cruise vacation? What? Yeah, no. It doesn't even make sense.
That's her bio from the Real Housewives of Salt Lake. Right. That's not her actual, that's not who she is. Right. But I love how Casey, I don't know what her position on the boat was.
She's a stewardess.
Oh, sure. She immediately is like, there's no such thing as Mormon royalty. I'm an ex-Mormon. Yeah. Like, right. I'm not sure what she means by that.
And like, I agree. I remember when first hearing Heather say that and being like, what does that even mean? Especially because like, she doesn't have a super prominent Mormon name. You know, if her last name was like Hinckley or Monson or something like that, where, you know, it's a name that we recognize from the leaders of the church, I would sort of get what she meant.
For sure.
But I think she just meant I married into a super rich Mormon family. And it's like, sure, so did a lot of people.
Right. That doesn't mean anything.
Like, and I think she means too, yeah, my family's been in the church a long time. Sure, so have a lot of families.
Right. You have pioneer ancestors. Look around.
Who doesn't?
So do we all.
We sure do. That's another weird moment where her Mormonism comes up. She orders eggs Benedict and then says, like my pioneer ancestors.
What are you talking about? What could she possibly mean by that?
Were they eating a lot of eggs Benedict in the Willie handcart company?
They sure weren't. But you know what? I actually really loved that moment because I was like, she's having fun with it. Like she's just saying stuff.
You can tell she's having fun with it, but it's getting to be a bit much. There's another moment where Angie Harrington is like, Heather, would you kiss any of the deckhands? Which was kind of awkward. They're actual people, not just like your little toys.
Minions.
Right? And Heather's like, no, I wouldn't kiss anyone without a spiritual and religious connection.
That's funny.
So, you know,
she's a comedian, man.
Coming up a lot.
Yeah.
Another thing I noticed, so Mormonism is her brand, but bad Mormonism. And so there are a lot of these moments too where it's like, let me show how bad I am.
Yeah.
And she makes kind of random jokes about like anonymous sex. There's this joke about scissoring that felt like it came out of nowhere.
Totally. Yeah. Not only, it was another joke that just didn't make any sense, but it was like, how often do you hear the word scissoring on TV?
Not that often.
It really caught me off guard.
I can't say I hear it too much, but just in general, you can tell this group is not as messy as the Ex-Mormons on Below Deck that we watched, but they're clearly like, let's let loose. Let's like finally be free. And Casey says that. She says freed Mormons are so fun. And I thought that phrasing was interesting. So freed from what? Let's talk about like your relationship to alcohol when you are a Mormon.
Yeah, let's talk about growing up Mormon and what you think of alcohol and people who drink it. Because that's a whole thing. So most people know Mormons do not drink alcohol, among other things. Mormons don't drink caffeine, hot drinks, coffee, tea, because of the word of wisdom.
And we've talked about the word of wisdom on this podcast. Received in 1833 by Joseph Smith, recorded in Doctrine and Covenants 89. We talked about it a lot on our episode about soda and caffeine because the language around that is confusing. But the language around alcohol, I looked it up just this morning. It's also a little confusing.
It is, for sure.
Okay, I'm going to read to you from Doctrine and Covenants 89. This is very exciting.
Please.
Verses 4-7. Behold, verily, thus saith the Lord unto you, in consequence of evils and designs which do and will exist in the hearts of conspiring men in the last days, I have warned you and forewarned you by giving unto you this word of wisdom by revelation. I remember being taught that this meant that there would be people who were like persecuting the Mormons and trying to get them through things like alcohol, coffee, whatever. And so the reason we don't partake is not just for our health, but to like avoid being taken in, swindled, harmed by these persecutors. Were you taught that?
Yeah.
Which is weird. And feeds the Mormon persecution complex for sure.
For sure.
So going on, verse 5. That inasmuch as any man drinketh wine or strong drink among you, behold, it is not good, neither meet in the sight of your Father, only in assembling yourselves together to offer up your sacraments before him.
Oh, really?
But it goes on, and behold, this should be wine, yea, pure wine of the grape of the vine of your own make. So this makes it sound like Mormons can drink wine when they're gathering together for sacrament, as long as they make the wine themselves.
Right. Which Mormons do not drink wine when they take the sacrament. They drink water.
And if you were like, in our ward, we're going to make our own wine and drink it at sacrament, and that'll be fine for the word of wisdom, you would not get away with that.
No, it would be a huge problem.
Even though that's actually what it says.
Right.
And this is the thing I feel like I'm realizing more and more as we talk more about Mormonism within the context of this podcast, is how much of the doctrine like actually doesn't make sense.
There are a lot of little things.
Origin texts don't say what modern Mormons say they say. And this is just another example. So anyway, verse 7, and again, strong drinks are not for the belly, but for the washing of your bodies. So we should be washing our bodies in like whiskey?
Or like, I guess I assume means washing your like wounds, like dressing your wounds with alcohol.
Sure, I guess that's the reasonable
I'm so sorry
of it. But still, just kind of weird, right?
Yeah.
But the way this is actually practiced in modern Mormonism is you absolutely cannot drink alcohol of any kind.
No.
And if you do, you can't go to the temple, which means you can't get married for eternity and you can't be with your family forever. So the consequences are pretty serious.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. And it's, not only like strictly within the church, like, sure, you won't be able to go to the temple. It'll be a huge issue for you within the church, but also just like culturally, the way that you're perceived by other fellow Mormons is pretty interesting. I thought a lot about that, when thinking about my own relationship with alcohol, because I'm like, why? Because I, growing up, didn't think I would ever touch alcohol or drugs, or I never would have thought I would experiment. But not only that, but I felt a lot of judgment and like pity for anyone who did. Like it wasn't like some like neutral, if not like kind of looked down upon thing that other people did. It was like a big sin.
Yes. And I would be curious to hear what other folks who grew up in Mormonism have to say about that, because I do know that we have a history of alcoholism in our family. And because of that, it was really framed to us like, you either abstain completely forever, never a drop, or you will be an alcoholic and it will destroy your life. Those were the options. And like, I do think that was a little bit specific to our family, but I also not. Like, I do think that's a fairly common way to think about it for Mormons.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who have alcoholism in their family have it framed to them like that. But when you add Mormonism to that, it's just like a recipe for a lot of a complex. Yeah, a lot of pressure, a lot of misguided. Yeah, it was a mess. It was a toxic.
Right.
Let's say.
It's interesting too when you look back at the actual text of D&C 89 and it says like, to protect you from, these connivers out in the world who are going to try to get to you, don't drink alcohol. Not because alcohol is inherently evil. That's not what it says. But that's what it's come to mean culturally.
Yeah. Abstaining from drinking alcohol will protect you from the influence of the devil and will protect your spirit, will, help you to keep with the Holy Ghost, you know.
Yeah.
That's pretty serious, you know.
No, that's true. That was definitely another big framing we had, was like, in the church, when you're baptized and confirmed, you're told you have the gift of the Holy Ghost, that it can always be with you. And you don't want to do anything to like dull the influence of the Holy Ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And so things like alcohol or all kinds of things are said to do that, and thereby put you into danger, right?
What a perfect thing, because like, yeah, alcohol does like literally dull your senses, you
Right.
know. It's scary. The consequences are enormous.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just this culture of like pity, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's no real understanding, I think, because most Mormons never drink.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no like real understanding of like, what's the deal with alcohol, you know.
Yeah.
They don't know. They never
Right.
have done it. A lot of them have had generations of family who've never tried it. So
Mm-hmm.
there's just blind judgment and just no understanding. So yeah, when it comes to like, if you have a family member or a friend in the church who's drinking, all you can offer them is like judgment and pity. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's not healthy at
Yeah.
all.
No, you're making me think about like, even because I went to college in Utah. There was a long period of my adulthood where I just wasn't around people who were drinking at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to Wisconsin,
Yeah.
where people's entire like social lives circulate around alcohol. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
true culturally. And I say that without judgment. It's just like a reality.
Right.
And so it was just like a social thing that you get together with your friends and your family, and you drink and you chat and you hang out. And that's what social life is.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to like our mom about like a good friend of mine and her family, and how I'd gotten together with them, and she's like, "What did y'all do?" And I was like, "Well, they had some wine and we just chatted, and like played some games and whatever." And it was like a real perspective shift for me to see that people could drink alcohol in a social, friendly way. And it was just like a thing they were doing together.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't loaded. It wasn't like
Right.
a problem. It was just natural and normal.
Yeah.
And it like literally brought them together in some ways.
Yeah, and it was just neutral for them. It wasn't
And
like a
neutral for
cause
them.
for like trouble or anything.
No.
It wasn't a problem.
Right. And
Yeah.
I remember talking about that with mom, and her kind of being like, I could just kind of see the glitching happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, no, 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 that can't be right. There has to be something sad here. There has
Yeah,
to be something wrong about this. And I get it, because I thought the same thing for a long time within the
for
framework of the
sure.
church. You can't just drink alcohol and have it be a neutral thing. And so when Mormons leave the church, it's hard to not bring that with you. Even as you're
Mhm.
like, I'm going to drink, it's not a neutral thing. For some and for some period of time.
Mhm.
We're not speaking for everybody, but
And I think honestly, I think it feels strange and you feel insecure about it for most ex-Mormons. Like I think you
yes.
can kind of say for most people it's weird.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about our experiences with alcohol.
Let's. You go first. Tell me about it.
Okay, I'll go first. So I never touched alcohol into my 30s, like not even a sip. And people would ask me, not even a sip? And it was like, no, literally nothing. I wouldn't have even considered it. It was just like not even on the table.
Yeah.
I was in my mid 20s before I even had caffeine, for crying out loud. Like I was not drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, I got my PhD in Wisconsin. It was a big cultural shift. I was just around people drinking more and seeing it in a way that I hadn't seen it or understood it before in my life, as
Mhm.
this like social neutral thing. Though of course I knew people too who were struggling with alcohol in that same culture.
Mhm.
It was just like, oh, that's, a sort of specific issue. It's
Mhm.
not the whole of alcohol, right?
Right.
Um So as I was kind of deciding about leaving the church in general and making choices in general that led me out of the path of Mormonism, I was asking myself, like, do I not drink alcohol because I don't want to, because I think it's a sin, because I think it's bad for me? What is my reason?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized at that point, my reason was fear of the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
I just had never done it and I was afraid. And fear of being vulnerable because I was in my 30s and had no experience with this thing that most people in the world have experienced much earlier in life. And I didn't
Yeah.
want to be that like obvious about how little I
Mm-hmm.
knew about a thing that everybody knows about. And I was like, those aren't good reasons to
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try it.
Yeah.
And so I enlisted my good friend to kind of like tutor me in the ways of drinking alcohol, and she was all for it. She was
Yeah.
great. I remember the first time I ever had alcohol, it was at her apartment. We were watching Bravo, of course, and probably Below Deck for all I know. And we had Prosecco
Mm-hmm.
and it was bubbly and sweet, and we had like strawberries with it, and I was like, I didn't particularly love the taste. I doubt that I finished a glass because it was too strong, and
Mm-hmm.
the flavor of alcohol was not pleasant to me. But I remember sleeping really well that night. And I was like, aha, this is why people do the like one glass of wine, right? It's
Yeah.
like
That'll
I
put you
just
right to
slept
bed.
like a freaking baby and I
Yeah.
felt all warm and cozy inside. But then after that, after kind of word got out that I was trying alcohol, I had friends who really were eager to like
Yeah.
introduce me to things.
I
And I
bet.
actually found in my phone, I kept this note of all the drinks I had tried and I rated them on a scale from 1 to 10. And I
Oh
didn't
my
do this for
gosh.
very long because, whatever. But I hated everything. I got to tell you, I hated everything.
That's
Nothing was
funny.
getting above like a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. But some of the things I tried like a summer shandy beer
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I gave it a 0.
Oh wow. Okay.
I hated it so much. It's like the only sip of beer I've ever had. I thought it was disgusting. Um, I tried a white Russian. Somebody thought I might like a
Ooh.
white Russian.
Whoa.
I put a -10. It was
Yeah, no.
so disgusting. I like Diet Coke, so someone was like, "You should try Diet Coke with red wine."
Oh my gosh.
Barf, horrible, hated it. I hated like everything. The only thing on here that I kind of liked was frozen margaritas that were fruit flavored and basically
Yeah.
just tasted like a fruit slushy.
Yeah.
I gave that actually a 9,
Yeah.
but then I added a note that was like, this gave me a headache.
Yeah, too sugary for sure.
So those are my like early days
That's so
notes
fun.
where I was trying alcohol and it was kind of funny. I did encounter some friends who were like a little pushy
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't
Yeah.
love that. And then there were people who were judgmental,
Mm-hmm.
like not close friends, but I remember people being out with us and hearing like, "Oh, you're just starting to drink, like, welcome to the real world." And I was like,
Okay.
"Don't be an
What are you
asshole."
talking about?
Like,
Plenty of people don't drink.
right. And there are so many reasons people don't drink. Anyway, that was its own sort of thing that I navigated for a while. Um, I had other friends of mine who were leaving the church around the same time as me and starting to drink around the same time as me. And I would see some of them get a little weird with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like be like, I'm gonna buy this like obscure liqueur and start making this like real niche cocktail. And that's gonna be like my thing. And other people I
Oh,
knew who hadn't grown up in Mormon alcohol culture were like, that's weird. People don't do that.
yeah.
So there was this kind of overcorrection that I was
Mm-hmm.
seeing a lot. And I have good friends of mine, never Mormon friends, who are like, who at this point are like, I can spot an Exmo based on how they talk about alcohol.
Oh,
Like
that's
before I
funny.
know anything about them,
Mm.
I'll like hear them talk about liquor and I'm like, oh, did you grow up in Utah?
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, they're right. Like, I do think there's this, this way of being like, oh, but look at me, I drink alcohol.
Yeah.
That other people don't feel like they need to do.
Right. It's sort of like they don't realize they're doing it, but they're being like, look at me, I'm drinking. I
Yeah.
drink,
Can you believe it?
Can you
Aren't I
believe it?
so normal and cool? And other people are like, you'd be a lot more normal and cool if you didn't say how normal and cool you were being. So
Oh,
anyway,
poor little Exmos.
I know, right? Ultimately, I'm bad at drinking alcohol. I don't like the taste of almost anything. The couple of things I have like the taste of, it's mostly because I mask it with juice or soda.
Yeah.
And even then, it just like makes me feel hot and it gives me a headache. And I've maybe finished like 3 drinks in my entire life.
Wow.
So I've kind of decided I don't really want to bother too much with it. Like, I'm not like, oh, I'll never have a drop of alcohol again, but I'm not
Yeah.
it out. And that's it.
Yeah. And it's so funny as somebody who like does not have like a good relationship. I mean, I don't have a relationship with alcohol. I don't drink anymore, but
Yeah.
when I did, it was not a healthy relationship. Hearing you say that, I'm just like, I think that's it just tickles me. I'm bad at drinking alcohol. It's like, good.
Yeah.
Good way to go.
Good for me,
You made
right?
it. You went through your little hobbit's journey of I'm going to try these alcohols and then didn't work
And it
out.
turned
Oh, too
out
bad.
I didn't really want to. And
I
I just
didn't
drink
like it.
water and Diet Coke.
Yeah.
And that's it.
I know before this episode, I was like, I want to have a little drink, a little prop drink. Like, do I have like any soda or anything? I don't have a damn thing in this house.
Yeah.
It's
Just
such a
water.
shame. And it's funny. It's how I know because I haven't had a drink in more than 5 years. It's how I know that I'm deep into sobriety because when you first get sober, holy moly, the amount of sodas and like LaCroix and like yummy little drinky poos you have to keep in the fridge so that you like always get to have a fun little drink to compensate for not having alcohol. That shows
That makes a
how
lot of
far I've
sense to
come.
me.
Made me feel good to think about.
Yeah. I'm lucky too that my husband, who's an ever Mormon, so doesn't have the kind of baggage around alcohol I do, he just doesn't really like it. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make him feel very good. And so it's just not a thing. I mean, I guess we do have alcohol in our house because people give it as gifts, but it just sits there and it's not like a thing we're really thinking about or worrying about or whatever. And I'm happy with that. I am way happier with that than with like being afraid of it.
Yeah.
So I think it's great.
Yeah, alcohol is cool. I have alcohol in my house too because people give it as gifts, which an important lesson, maybe an important takeaway. Don't give alcohol as a gift unless you know the giftee very well.
Right. Because you all like truly are abstaining.
Yes.
Yeah. You don't want alcohol as a gift.
No, we don't want alcohol, but we keep it. Got some nice champagne, some nice wine. It just sits in the cupboard. Somebody can crack into it someday.
Someday. Okay, what about you? What's your story, Katie?
Yeah, my story looks a little bit different. So, like I mentioned, when I was like growing up in the church and like a kid and a preteen, I would never have imagined that I would drink. And I was like a very goody two shoes, like kind of judgmental Mormon kid. Just your average Mormon kid, really, at the end of the day. I don't know what happened. Well, first I was going to mention, I remember, I don't know if it was before your mission or after your mission, but you made me promise that I wouldn't do drugs or drink. I don't know if it was like maybe right before I started high school or I was in middle school. I don't know, but I remember being pretty young that and I had never used drugs or alcohol at that point, but I remember thinking, I don't think I'm going to be able to keep that promise. And I felt
so funny.
And I felt bad because I, of course, promised you I wasn't gonna. I'm gonna be like, I don't know, Lisa. But yeah, that's
Did
a
I
memory.
like sit you down and be like, Katie, promise
Yeah,
me?
I remember we were in my room. I remember what I was wearing. I was wearing this red I think BYU, well, I don't know why a BYU shirt would be red. Maybe it was like a Hill Cumorah pageant shirt. Maybe it was after your mission.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. Anyway, yeah.
Hilcomore pageant is another thing we got to talk about one of these days.
For sure. So yeah, at that point I had, at 13 or whatever, I had not done any experimenting with anything, but I was very much like, I don't know, I'm on a path, Elisa.
Yeah.
We'll see. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I was such a good little kid. I don't know if I got like kicked in the head or,
No.
I don't know what happened to me, but I was certainly on a path. I think I just didn't really have any good, like, real role models day to day who were like
Mm-hmm.
real with me about stuff. And I was just doing what my friends were doing. So by the time I was in high school, I started experimenting, to be honest, with prescription drugs first,
Oh,
because
wow.
that's just what happened to be what my friends were doing. It was
Mm-hmm.
kind of a rough crowd. I wasn't like taking exorbitant amounts of anything or getting super high, but it was just kind of a little bit of a thing we did.
Yeah.
It was an icebreaker.
A
And
gateway,
things
as they
it was
say.
a gateway, as they say. Not a normal gateway, kind of a weird gateway, but a gateway.
Mm-hmm.
And then things just like kind of progressed from there. I just was kind of doing what everybody else was doing. So I think the summer after my freshman year of high school is when I started drinking and smoking weed, but I mostly just smoked weed through high school. I wasn't like a really big drinker. I was like sometimes a weekend drinker, like,
Sure.
or like after prom for sure, like after a dance, but it wasn't like a big thing. I mean, it felt like a big thing to me, of course. It
Mm-hmm.
felt crazy, but I immediately just like enjoyed it. I didn't necessarily always like everything I tried in terms of like how it tasted, but I liked how it made me feel. I liked getting drunk and just having a good time. And I had really
Mm-hmm.
fun friends. As I got older, my friends were less like sketchy and more just like normal teenagers who liked to smoke weed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in like a pretty safe environment. I was never in like super crazy scenarios, like scary party, vampire
Yeah.
dungeon, weird. You hear stories, or your Mormon brain concocts ideas of what a
Mm-hmm.
drinking teenager is going to be up to. But it was really just you know having a bonfire with my friends and whatever.
I love a
It
bonfire.
was a lot of fun.
That sounds
um
delightful.
Totally. And it really was mostly delightful. Like I had a good time. I was really irresponsible and like pretty reckless. Like I went through like a pretty crazy phase, not necessarily in terms of like drinking a bunch, but just like doing stupid stuff. I was like very stupid. It wasn't until I was like 2021 when I started drinking like all the time. Like it went
Mm-hmm.
from just kind of a thing I did to like, well, now I like live on my own, and I definitely by the time I was 21, I was like, I can buy alcohol for myself. Like I'm gonna start drinking all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just quickly turned into a problem. And at that time, I was already married. And my husband also very quickly started showing like major red flags for alcoholism. And
Mm-hmm.
like he like really desperately needed help. We tried to like make life changes to hopefully get sober, and it just unfortunately didn't work out for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were several years where I was like daily drinking, or at least near daily drinking, and I didn't have anybody I could talk to about it. It was
Mm-hmm.
a total like I couldn't talk to anybody in my family about it, not only because of the history of alcoholism. There was this cloud over everything, but also just being raised in that sort of like pitying,
Mm-hmm.
judgmental culture. Like I'm the type of person where I already, you know, I don't confide in people when I am in trouble or need help, because I think because of that whole pity thing.
Yeah.
Like I don't want that. That's unhelpful to me. It's unhelpful to people
Mm-hmm.
in general. And
Pity and like shame.
yeah.
Yeah. That's what
And
you're gonna get.
I didn't want people to think differently of me, because I felt like I was able to keep up appearances somewhat,
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just going to do that and just try to figure it out on my own. jump to a few years later. I was probably like 24, 25, probably still 24 when it just like really came to a head, and I realized I had been trying to get sober for my husband because he was
Mm-hmm.
really sick, and um I had like kind of a mental shift, and I realized I needed to do it for me because I realized I was also sick. I kind of didn't realize it until right before I actually did get sober, but luckily 5 years ago I was able to do it, and so was my husband. It was just
Mm-hmm.
kind of a miracle. It was a lot of hard work, but it's also kind of a miracle.
Yeah.
And ever since, we just like kind of never looked back. And luckily, probably a year or so into sobriety, maybe a little bit less, I was able to start talking to my family about it.
Mm-hmm.
Our family. But it took a lot of guts. It was
Yeah.
not an easy thing to come clean about.
Do you
I
remember how people reacted? I remember you telling me. I remember very vividly. We were in West Jordan.
mhm,
We were driving around. We had just
mhm.
gotten so delicious.
Hell yeah.
And you were talking to me about it. And I was shocked. I had no idea
Yeah.
that anything had been going on. And I think part of it is I had no experience.
Mhm.
And so I just didn't even know what to look for or to even know to look for anything, you know?
Mhm. Yeah.
I think I knew that you all drank or smoked weed or whatever,
Mhm.
but I just didn't even think about it beyond that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think too, because it can kind of be like a fine line, especially when you're really young. Like I was really young when I was going through that stuff, so it was it's a little bit like I think some people wouldn't have recognized it in themselves at
Mhm.
that point either. I think having a husband who was very sick from it, like very
Mhm.
physically like on the brink, you know,
Mhm.
definitely shed light on it. I found myself in situations where I realized I was sneaking alcohol and doing lots of like
Mm.
really seriously serious red flag behaviors that,
Sure.
you know, put me over that line.
Mhm.
But yeah, I remember telling you too. And I remember it was the first time I was able to like kind of like take it seriously for myself
Mhm.
when you are just only kind of going through it in your own head. I don't know if it's just like a way to protect yourself, but you can kind of make yourself feel like, oh, it's nothing. It's nothing.
Mhm.
It's nothing. And then you share it with somebody else and you start sharing like intimate details, and it becomes like, oh, right. Like this is a fully formed problem
Yeah.
right now. This is
Mhm.
like needs to be addressed right now. But yeah, it was a long time before I told our parents. Because I wasn't sober when I told you.
Mhm.
I was still drinking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah.
remember that. I remember you just telling me that you wanted to make a change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to make a change. We were in Utah. I didn't live in Utah. I lived in Oregon at the time. And I was thinking about it a lot while I was there because I wasn't drinking, but I
Mhm.
remember thinking there's no way I'm going to be able to keep this up as soon as I get home. Like as soon
Mhm.
as I get home from this like 4 or 5 days I was in Utah, I'm going to immediately drink. And I did.
Mhm.
And but yeah, that was a big moment for me. But yeah, I don't know. What's the takeaway?
What's the
the, the
takeaway?
takeaway for me, really a big thing is like if you're a person who's ex-Mormon and like doesn't drink, or even if you do, I don't know. And definitely if you're somebody who's still in the church, definitely be aware of how you talk about these things with your children
Mhm.
and your loved ones, like avoiding um that shame and judgment and pity as much as you can, and just be
Mhm.
real with people. Like this is a real thing. It's a normal thing. It can be a neutral thing.
Mhm.
It's something that when you're in the church, you follow the word of wisdom for the reasons that you do, but you don't need to blow alcohol up into like way more than it is,
Yeah.
because you don't know who you're alienating. You could be alienating your little child that you love more than anything and that you want to protect. You could be accidentally sending them down a road where they, lose control and have nowhere to turn because of the way that you decided to parent them. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway. I think one thing I'm thinking about as you're talking is like, because we had no experience with alcohol, no examples of alcohol, like consumption, but also discussion, it was just so black and white. And so, like you said, rooted in pity and shame and fear. That was problematic for all sorts of reasons and is not I think a healthy way obviously to approach alcohol. But the overcorrection of that we sometimes see with ex-Mormons, where it's like, I'm free, and alcohol, not drinking is like silly, right? Like, if you're not drinking, you're not living. Yeah. It's like, okay, hang on. It is still more nuanced than that too.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that finding that nuance and like a healthy way to like think about and understand and talk about alcohol is maybe an ongoing project for ex-Mormons. I don't like fully know how to talk about it.
And I think it should be that same project for everyone. Like, people don't do enough reflection, I think, when it comes to that sort of thing. A big problem for me was that I was using drugs and alcohol to self-medicate. For sure. I had a huge, major mental health spiral when I got sober. It was very difficult, made it all the harder. Like, getting sober alone is hard, but needing to figure out what kind of medications I needed to be on and getting into therapy. I mean, it was just like I had been just completely covering up everything for my whole adulthood.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare. So it's like, if you're a person who, let's say you're an ex-Mormon and you haven't quite taken that step, but you're kind of interested in trying alcohol, it's like, how is your mental health? Like, how's your relationship with the people you care about most? Do you feel like you can be honest with them? Do you have people that you can confide in, and do you do it regularly? How do you feel about socializing? Like, do you feel like you have an easy time socializing, or is it hard for you? Because that was another thing for me.
Yeah.
I don't have an easy time socializing, but I did when I drank, so it just was not a good fit for me.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be a good fit for everybody, but it can be completely neutral. So
good luck.
Good luck.
All of that. No, I feel like that's very wise to think about it in that way. I also just love that a silly little show like Below Deck can get you sort of thinking about these kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
This is just my, yet again, plug for reality TV. I think that it gets a lot of hate as being like lowbrow and superfluous and like fluffy. And I think that it can be actually like sort of profound.
I love that. Like, especially a show like Below Deck features real people. Like, these people who work on these boats are like people, I can see people that I've worked with at lots of customer service jobs or whatever jobs I've worked in my life. Like, I see them reflected back in these characters. And that's a lot of fun. You don't get a lot of that on TV, where you just have like
kind regular people.
Yeah. No, with totally. Bad makeup and bad hair.
Yeah.
Bad choices. And
yep,
it's fun.
Katie, how do we always go deep?
We can't help it. We're philosophers.
This is such an appropriate episode to kick off January 2023.
Oh, sure.
If you're a dry January person,
yeah,
we support you. If you're not a dry January person, we support you.
Totally.
Because it's so nuanced. Do what makes sense for you.
Yeah. You know what I've been wanting to do lately? Do a screen cleanse.
Oh, interesting.
Not for a month, because that's I don't think that's doable. But a little week, or even a little business week.
Interesting.
That could be my dry January.
I don't hate that idea, but it does make me think about how President Nelson, the current prophet of the Mormon Church, he like enacted this like social media fast. Do you remember this?
Oh
It was a
yeah.
couple of years ago. And it turned out that there was some story breaking about like some scandal in his family. And it was like the same week that he was like, let's just do a social media fast. Anyway,
You shifty
Ex-Mormon
bastard.
conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I remember hearing about
yeah,
that. That's so funny.
Do a screen fast, but not because an old man tells you to.
Yeah. You have to come up with it on your own for sure.
Yes.
Don't listen to me either. You don't know what
Yeah, Katie could have
my motives.
She doesn't want you to see the story break.
Yeah.
About her scandal. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
Yeah.
Follow us everywhere at Please Bless Pod. Email us at pleaseblesspod@gmail.com. Oh my gosh, we got another review on Apple Podcasts. I want to shout out Shameless Hussy, which is an outstanding username, who gave us a really nice review. Thank you so much. Don't be afraid to write us a review on Apple Podcasts, because we will love you forever.
Yeah, don't be afraid.
Please bless Captain Lee. I love that we both went there first. I just want the best for him.
Yeah.
Please bless Heather Gay. You know, she's going through an important transition in her life. Please bless all of us.
Yeah, please bless me. Thank
and
you.
Please bless this podcast.
Amen.